Hello, 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 folks. Welcome back to Holding Space. Melinda Zappone, if you're coming to us from Substack, my favorite place in the world for writing and healing, and Enya. Everyone needs you always if you're coming to us from YouTube or Spotify. And we're just here to hold space, to organize your healing journey. A lot of people out there trying to understand this concept. And I'm here to speak from truth. You can waste a lot of time by not understanding the phases of healing, which I've combined into something called the toolbox approach. And registered trademarked it not because I want to own it, but because I want to stand by it and for it, no matter what platform I'm on, if I'm in private sessions as a therapist, if I'm trying to democratize mental health, if I'm trying to be a content creator, or if I'm trying to use it on myself. So let's go, guys. We're going to talk about sometimes it's simply about willingness. Some people are not willing to show up for a relationship in a consistent reciprocal way, not because they're broken, not because they can't, not because you're not enough, because they won't. And we'll get a little bit more into this. But first, I kind of wanted to just almost give a kind of like an anecdote of this imaginary experience that I kind of envisioned in my mind, but I think it's also very universal. Um, let's say you've lost track of how many times you're trying to take a peaceful walk, keep a promise to yourself, or do something good for your body. And suddenly that person is in your mind again. You hover over the idea of making contact, reaching out, considering if a better connection is possible, all with a head full of things you never got to say. Part of you aches for another chance at an explanation and wonder what actually happens between us that we can't stay connected. You're worried if this will ever come to a close in your mind, if it will ever stop, and what will resolve this feeling. Still, another part of you knows exactly what would happen if you open that door again. The same disappointment, the same confusion, the same unanswered emotional hunger. You replay it all in your mind and still can't believe you missed the truth. They were there with you, technically, but they were never with you, for you, or by you. They didn't witness you, respond to you, or step toward you. And the hardest question rises up every time. Why wouldn't they just see what was happening and work on it? Why wouldn't they just show up so you could finally know it wasn't you? So let's slow down and get clear. The truth is, you will waste your time on emotional unavailability. It's part of learning love and connection. There is no way around this, and it starts in childhood. Some of us will be deeply imprinted on by emotional unavailability and repeat the circumstances in adulthood in subconscious ways. Others will experience it as such an outlier, a one off, and see that it stands out as just not connection. And this will safely imprint and cause a repellent reaction where one learns to stay away from it. There's a spectrum of experiences in between, but an emotional unavailability experience with another person is unavoidable. It's frequent, in fact. Exhaustion and confusion that so many of us feel when we are stuck in loops with people who can't meet us emotionally is not relational failure. It's a trauma response that turns into a pattern that can form an almost addictive behavior. You become attached to the familiarity of the process, anxiously or in a disorganized fashion, and you're trying to decode them instead of choosing yourself because you didn't learn this. You never entered a classroom in school called choosing yourself. This classroom doesn't come until much later, and it's often a classroom of one. After a loss of something you could have sworn was emotional availability and sadly was not, nor would it be no matter how hard you tried. Sometimes it's simply about willingness. That's what we're talking about today. Some people are not willing to show up for a relationship in a consistent, reciprocal way, not because they're broken, not because they can't, not because you're not enough, because they won't. Things like trauma, attachment style, and personality are valid explanations that come from the top down approach to overcoming confusing relational rupture. However, there is a core truth that we all need to grow capacity to sense in our guts. At the body or somatic level, they don't want to stretch. They don't want to be accountable. We need to learn this feeling in our guts. They don't want to nurture a bond. They want connection without responsibility, closeness without discomfort, and intimacy without the vulnerability that sustains it. And too often, we make our willingness our self blame project. We analyze their mixed signals, we justify their distance, we rewrite our standards to match their capacity. We exhaust ourselves trying to understand a problem that was never ours to solve. Here's the shift. Stop trying to figure out why someone won't choose you. Start paying attention to how you abandon yourself in the process. Because every time you over-explain, over-function, over-give to keep a half-hearted connection alive, you move further away from your own emotional center. You shrink, you negotiate your worth, you become the one doing all the emotional labor while they simply receive. And that imbalance is the red flag. The imbalance is not their childhood trauma or their attachment style, not their busy work schedule, and not their fear of getting hurt. The red flag is that you are always the one moving toward them, and they are rarely moving towards you. Let that land. Healthy connection requires reciprocity. Emotional availability is shown through behavior, not potential. A person who is emotionally available repairs instead of retreats, communicates discomfort instead of creating distance, shows appreciation without prompting, moves toward resolution instead of escalation, invests consistently instead of sporadically. They don't disappear when it matters. They don't make you question your worth. They don't punish your vulnerability with silence. And here's the hard truth. You cannot create emotional availability in another person through effort, patience, or understanding. You can only choose not to participate in relationships where you are the only one showing up. When you stop analyzing the unavailable person, something powerful happens. You finally have the energy left to notice yourself, your feelings, your unmet needs, your ignored intuition, your desire for a relationship where you don't have to earn closeness or apologize for wanting connection. And that's when you start choosing yourself. We don't truly choose ourselves out of anger, out of punishing someone, or out of strategy, but out of clarity. The clarity that comes when you realize if someone else's emotional unavailability keeps hurting you, the most self-respecting thing you can do is step toward the person who is willing to show up fully, and that's yourself. So what creates intimacy? The ingredients for emotional availability are the willingness to be seen and to see someone else. Openness is also an ingredient, reciprocity, and empathy. It's also the use of time and building safety and trust with the skills of deliberate communication and consistent attunement, not just to yourself, but the other person's experience as not good or bad, better or worse, but other. Curiosity and connection to the other person is not trauma dumping our past in one fell swoop or constant emotional processing. It's not giving a person space to avoid conflict or watching what you say all the time to not trigger them. It's a willingness to ask questions that aim for deeper connection and understanding, not convenient explanations that stop the pursuit of exploration of each other in one sentence. When someone is emotionally available, they respond to your vulnerability with curiosity. They share themselves gradually. They don't create distance every time closeness increases. Emotional availability is, in fact, a feeling. The layers that get felt, that get known, feel like both an invitation to something special and a desire to actually lean in. Emotional availability, emotional unavailability can also be felt almost more than it can be understood. We can try to understand it through analysis, but it is a feeling. It is when the connection stays on the surface and conversations feel scripted or like there is a control mechanism around them and they don't deepen. It's when you try to go for more depth, but there's a barrier there you can feel. When a barrier of confusion and offense are there, you'll be wondering if something you did, if it is something that you did when you could swear they were leaning in and they wanted your connection before. The barrier is there when you feel them pull away, when things begin to get close and layers will be revealed, but instead You get that whiplash, that retraction. You sense the barrier, but you did not create it. If you want to be honest, it happened before. It happened from well before you and well before you entered this relationship. And that's the only truth to focus on, despite all the valuable information out there that can help us surpass power struggles in relationships and repair the bonds, understand their maintenance and the ingredients for emotional safety. When there is emotional unavailability, you will not cure it in the other person, no matter how hard you try to. What is important to know is that emotional unavailability is not always about trauma or avoidant attachment. Sometimes it's much simpler, and it is simply about willingness. Now, I want to talk about the toolbox approach on willingness. I think it's a structure that can help us. For those of us on a healing journey, it's essential to understand that all healing journeys naturally cycle through periods of disorganization. We may revisit earlier phases as our nervous system gains the capacity to reprocess experiences and stay embodied long enough to move beyond simple awareness of our wounds and into the deeper transformative work. This is the work that repairs the broken narratives, shaping our inner sense of self and our relational patterns in the world. So, within the toolbox approach, the phases of healing are organized as follows: the narrative healing phase, the reprocessing healing phase, the relational healing phase. Willingness becomes especially important during the relational healing phase. When we begin to enter our or emphasize this phase, the relational healing phase, we inevitably confront the need to build tools that expand our capacity for willingness, the emotional availability required for genuine connection within ourselves and with others, held within appropriate boundaries that help us discern where and with whom we want to bring that openness. So let's kind of understand the phases of healing in action, okay? Before reaching the relational healing phase and before cultivating the willingness needed to live from a healed truth, I think an example may illustrate the process a little bit more clearly. So imagine you're in the narrative healing phase, but the broken narrative is no one truly wants me unless I'm understanding and helpful. People need me to be this way. If this narrative goes unquestioned for years, it can sediment itself into the developing brain, embedding across neural pathways until it forms what feels like an unquestionable internal truth. It becomes part of the mind. So it moves beyond being in the brain and part of the mind. The mind is the narrator of our inner world. In this narrative healing phase, the narrative can begin to loosen. You may start to see its limitations and recognize the grief beneath it. You discover that this belief was never yours to carry. Then we enter the reprocessing healing phase, and here, memories linked to this narrative can be revisited and reorganized. For example, you may reprocess a moment when you stayed small and compliant, following a script that felt helpful, even though what would have been more empowering was to express discomfort, disagree with the storyline, or even set a boundary, or all three. You can imagine how this could have been done in a regulated, calm, kind, and self honoring way. That's the reprocessing healing phase. Experiencing the safety of this reprocess often brings another layer of grief as you witness what could have been available to you. And then we get to the relational healing phase. Now the task becomes living in the truth you uncovered. For example, I don't need to be helpful and understanding all the time to belong. When we live in that truth, this is where willingness becomes essential. You need the willingness to be emotionally available to the the newly reclaimed part of yourself, the discomfort of living differently, the relationships that will meet you in this new way, and the boundaries that protect your growth. Willingness is the bridge between internal insight and external embodiment. It is the capacity that turns healing from a private transformation to a relational reality. So I thought maybe we'd do an exercise building capacity to stay willing. This is a blend of somatic and narrative integration practice specifically for the relational healing phase. Willingness is not a mood, it's a capacity state. Like all capacities, it can be strengthened with intentional, gentle practice. This exercise helps the body build the ability to remain emotionally available to new truths, new parts of self, and new relational experiences without collapsing into old protective patterns. So, step one, name the truth you are learning to live in. Choose the emerging truth you want to practice staying willing for. For example, I don't have to be helpful to belong. My needs are valid even if they inconvenience someone. I can say no without losing connection. Those are good examples, but I want you to really think or more preferably write your truth in the most concise form possible. Using this prompt, what truth am I practicing staying willing for today? And in the article, I even leave you a little blank. Sometimes people like to print this out and do the work. Let's move on to step two. Notice the first body reaction. When you read the new truth slowly, notice what your body does instantly. I can say no without losing connection. Notice if a tightening the chest happens, or a small holding of breath, a shrinking sensation behind the ribs, a subtle brace in the jaw or shoulders, a heaviness or collapse in the belly. You're not looking for something dramatic. You're simply mapping your somatic resistance. It's perfectly normal for something to internally say no to this. Step three, bring 10% more breath to that spot. Yeah, I'm really feeling that in my shoulder right here. It kind of went up. So when you don't use a forced breath, but just 10% more space, you can imagine widening the area around the sensation just slightly. This is how the nervous system learns to stay, to expand around discomfort, to tolerate the unfamiliarity of living differently. This step begins the actual building of capacity. Slowly notice what happens when you give the sensation of staying a sensation of staying just a bit more space. Stay with it. Step four, ask the body a willingness question. Gently ask, am I willing to stay open to this truth for the next 30 seconds? If the body says no, you honor it. Willingness is never forced. Forced willingness is compliance, not healing. If the body says maybe, that's a yes. If it says yes, breathe even further into it. Step five, your willingness boundary. Willingness needs boundaries so it does not become self-abandonment. Identify one situation where you are willing to practice this truth, and one situation where you are not yet willing to practice. Example, I'm not yet willing to practice this with coworkers. I am willing to practice this with a sibling. This creates safe relational conditions for practicing the new truth. So gently consider where you are willing to try this today and where you are not, and take note of this. Step six, choose one micro action of willingness. Pick a tiny, low risk behavior that embodies your truth. For example, saying, I need a moment to think before I respond. Another example, asking for clarity instead of assuming responsibility right away. Saying, that doesn't work for me, at least once this week. Letting one person see you pause instead of instantly helping. These are all examples from the previous example, so we can kind of keep a unified example here. But I encourage you to create some truths for yourself, some willingness truths. Micro actions will train the nervous system without overwhelming it. You do not want to take on big, huge, massive change that is just as threatening to the nervous system as an actual trigger. So step seven, close with a regulation cue. This is how you signal your system that you stayed, you didn't abandon yourself, and like, we are safe, you and you. Choose like a long exhale. See how long that was? I waited until I was totally empty. A hand on the heart, pressing feet into the floor, straightening up a spine, a slow nod. Anything you can do to close with a regulation cue. And if you're wondering why I do know that this exercise works, it's because willingness is not conceptual. You can't just analyze your capacity for willingness. It lives in somatic expansion. Obviously, we can't get larger than we already are, but we can fill ourselves more completely and stop the shrinking that creates false self, false narratives, and non willingness to be emotionally available. It also is nervous system safety. When you do this activity, you are doing the work with yourself and you are becoming the safest person you connect to on a daily basis, or at least once a week. And relational boundaries are created that match your capacity. When you're just working with you, you're matching your capacity. You're trusting yourself to create your own relational boundaries with you and you first. This practice slowly rewires the system to tolerate living as the person you are becoming without collapsing back into the person you had to be for survival. So I'm going to bring this all together today, guys, with just another call out for why to consider a 3-day healing intensive. I've been training in healing intensives for over a year. I'm encouraging you to explore them through doing them with me. We're launching this in the spring, but also you can research. These are out there. These concept of healing intensive. When patterns have guided our lives for years, it can feel overwhelming to imagine where to even begin. Healing can seem abstract, scattered, or endless. But when healing is organized into phases, when you can see where you are, why you were there, and what tools belong to that stage, everything becomes within your capacity to learn, exercise, and practice. This is exactly what the 3-day healing intensive is. It's designed really to offer clarity, containment, and a structured path forward. Over the course of 3 days, you move through the phases of narrative healing, reprocessing healing, and relational healing with depth, direction, and professional guidance from me. The intensive does not replace long-term healing. It helps your nervous system know inner work is within your capacity. And you forevermore can just know that you can go to a therapy session or workshop with more capacity, with more organization inside yourself, not hoping that the workshop is going to crack something open, but almost knowing what phase that you're in and being intentional about what healing activities you select for yourself. So you are really accelerating that understanding, clarifying your direction, organizing the work ahead, so you're no longer wandering, self-blaming, or trying to heal yourself with guesswork. What we do in this support is offer 2.5 hours of coursework a day to understand the phases and your patterns, 1.5 hours of therapy each day to apply the tools to your personal journey, 1 hour of coaching each day to integrate healing into relationships, career, health, and everyday life. And after you're completed this, you'll be welcome to a bonus half day group session. A lot of people are doing healing intensives, and anyone that does it with me and completes is welcome to join us for a group half day to accelerate your healing through group work. The structure of the intensive allows you to see your healing in a way that makes sense. You leave not fixed, but informed, grounded, and empowered, because we're never fixing. We are just always healing. Our symptoms, our triggers are not problems we solve, but things we notice, lean into, and heal. Most importantly, with an intensive, you leave with a sense that healing is not something you have to earn, perfect, or chase, but something you're allowed to organize, inhabit, and grow into. That's the purpose of the registered trademark toolbox approach. It's the intensive of the 3-day healing intensive, and it's my work for my lifetime. So I would encourage you to arrange your discovery call here inside the post. The setup, the link that I provide you in Substack, and it's in the show notes on either YouTube or Spotify, encourages you to come with your insurance information. So after the healing intensive that you already screened to do 1 or 2 therapy sessions as follow-up with me, And you're not required to do any more than the 3 days. Go out there and live your life and do therapy with somebody else. I think this could really structure things for you and organize your healing journey. Please use the messaging button if you just like to ask me a few questions, and we can see if we can work something out, rather than a discovery call. But that usually is the process to officially enter. Other stuff, I would love if this is just almost like, not in your wheelhouse yet, but you do just want to kind of engage with this content. I would love for you to just go over to the Patreon site where we would host some of the courses and fill out the survey. There's a cool poll that talks about healing intensives, and I would love to get your feedback. You don't have to share any information, just your feedback. Because if this doesn't call to you just yet, your voice still matters to me, your healing matters to me. I just want to hear you. I want to serve your journey and clear that path. Your answers could be vital to my cause, democratize mental health, and really empower people with an organized healing journey. And lastly, please head over to the author's website to access the book on the first phases of healing. You Are Not Broken, and explore the site for all the free resources and posted events. And you can even leave me a message there too. I want to be accessible to you and help you organize a healing journey. Most importantly, everybody, just heal on. Welcome if this is your first time. Welcome to the Enya community.